There is a moment in your life when you look in the mirror and realize you're carrying a weight you never agreed to hold, a heaviness you didn't choose, a story that didn't start with you but somehow became your responsibility to finish. And maybe you've never said it out loud, but deep down, you know something you've tried to avoid. The way you move through the world, the way you talk to yourself, the things you're afraid to reach for, are tied to the woman who raised you, or the woman who didn't. This isn't about blame. This isn't about turning your mother into a villain, or pretending she didn't do her best with what she had. It's about something quieter, something you feel late at night, when the noise fades, and the distractions fall away, and you're left alone with a question you've pushed away for years. Why do I feel so small? Why do I struggle with things that seem so simple for other people? Why do I keep fighting invisible battles that no one else seems to see? And the beginning of that answer, whether you like it or not, often leads back to your mother. A mother does not just raise a child, she raises their inner narrator, the voice you hear when you make a mistake, the voice you hear when you look in the mirror, the voice you hear when you disappoint someone, when you're about to take a risk, when you're trying to decide whether you deserve more. For some people, that voice is gentle. For others, it is sharp, demanding, relentless. For many, it is anxious and afraid. And for you, maybe it became a voice that makes you shrink instead of rise, a voice that second-guesses every instinct, a voice that turns every desire into a debate, a voice that repeats old patterns you inherited without ever realizing it. Maybe you've asked yourself, why do I second-guess everything? Why do I crumble when I feel even a little criticized? Why do I overthink love, friendships, opportunities, until they pass me by? It's not because you were born fragile. It's because you were trained to exist in a world shaped by someone else's fears. Think about how a child learns what it means to be too much or not enough. Children don't learn that from books. They learn it from faces, from tones, from reactions. If your mother gave love but only when you pleased her, you learned to perform for affection. If she loved you but always seemed tired, sad, or overwhelmed, you learned to make yourself small so you wouldn't be one more problem. If she was overly critical, you learned to scan for flaws before anyone else could. If she worried about everything, you inherited anxiety as your base setting. If she overprotected you, you learned that the world is dangerous and that you can't trust yourself. If she was emotionally fragile, you became her stabilizer, the child who had to be strong so she could fall apart. If she sacrificed everything for everyone else, you learned that burning yourself out in silence is what love looks like. If she chased perfection, you learned that good enough is never truly enough. If she was distant, you learned to question whether you were worth showing up for. If she was unpredictable, you learned to walk on emotional eggshells, always reading the room, never resting inside yourself. If she never apologized, you learned that admitting you're wrong is dangerous and humiliating. If she avoided conflict, you learned that honesty is a threat and peace means suppressing your true feelings. If she never allowed herself joy, you learned that happiness must be earned through constant effort and suffering. None of this necessarily makes her a bad person. It makes her human. But it also means you grew up defending yourself against things you never should have had to defend yourself from. And maybe that's why you feel weak now. Not because you are weak, but because you grew up in emotional survival mode. You were learning how to manage her moods. Instead of learning how to understand your own, you were learning how not to upset her. Instead of learning how to express yourself, you were learning to protect her feelings. Instead of learning to protect your boundaries. And survival mode changes the brain. That's not just metaphor. That's neuroscience. Environments shaped by anxiety, criticism, unpredictability, or emotional distance affect the development of stress pathways, self-worth, and decision-making. So if you feel stuck today, it may not be because you're incapable. It may be because your nervous system was trained from childhood to anticipate disapproval, disappointment, or danger instead of possibility. Think about how much of you was formed by trying to solve someone else's emotional puzzle. How much of your identity was built on questions like, will this upset her? Will this disappoint her? Will this make her proud of me? You learned to hide your true reactions because being honest felt risky. You learned to swallow anger because conflict felt unsafe. You learned to overcare for others because you were taught directly or indirectly that your job was to make sure everyone else was okay. That's not weakness. That's adaptation. That's your mind and body doing the best they could with the environment they were given. But here is where life becomes complicated. What once protected you becomes the very thing that limits you as an adult. You learned emotional freezing as a child, and now you call it indecision. You learned to constantly anticipate someone else's reactions, and now you call it being considerate, even when it's self-erasure. You learned to ignore your needs, and now you call it being low maintenance. You learned to say, it's fine, when it wasn't, and now you call it being easygoing. You learned to avoid asking for help, and now you call it independence. You learned to take care of everyone else first, and now you call it love. You learned to dim your dreams so no one felt threatened, and now you call it realism. What if you're not really choosing these things? What if many of them were chosen for you before you knew you had a choice? Because here's a truth most people never say out loud. Your relationship with your mother became the blueprint for how you relate to yourself, and often for how you relate to others. If your mother dismissed your feelings, you learned to dismiss them too. If she minimized your hurt, you learned to tell yourself, it's not that big of a deal, even when your world is falling apart inside. If she only praised achievement, you learned that your worth is measured by productivity and performance. If she was constantly self-critical, you absorbed that voice and aimed it inward. If she stayed in situations where she was undervalued, you learned to tolerate less than you deserve. If she depended on you emotionally, you learned that your role is to fix, soothe, and carry others. And maybe what you call weakness today is actually inherited self-protection. But let me tell you something important. You do not have to continue the story you were handed. People underestimate how deeply a mother's energy stamps itself onto a child, not just through her words, but through her body language, through what she says about herself, about other people, about the world, about you, through the way she handles stress, through the way she talks about her own needs, or never talks about them at all. A mother unconsciously teaches you what you are allowed to feel, what you are allowed to want, what you are allowed to be. And if she struggled with her own inner wounds, she may have unintentionally handed you the unfinished chapters of her story, not out of cruelty, but out of repetition. You may have grown up believing that exhaustion is normal, that overextending yourself is noble, that never complaining makes you good, that caretaking is your primary purpose, that rest must be earned, that your needs are negotiable, that your emotions are a burden, that being difficult is the worst thing you can be. But look at what that has cost you. Look at how quickly you apologize for simply existing with needs and feelings. Look at how guilty you feel when you say no. Look at how uncomfortable you become. when someone praises you. Look at how you replay conversations, wondering if you sounded rude or ungrateful for simply being honest. Look at how you downplay your pain because others have it worse. Look at how numb you feel at times, even around things that should bring joy. This isn't weakness. This is emotional conditioning. And people rarely talk about it because no one wants to admit that the person they needed the most also created invisible battlefields inside their mind. But healing begins with honesty, and honesty begins here. You didn't become this way alone. You learned your habits, you learned your defenses, you learned your reactions, your fears, your hesitations. You learned what it meant to be good, to be lovable, to be enough from the environment you grew up in. So when people tell you, just be confident, they don't realize you were raised in a world where confidence felt like danger, where asking for more risked being called selfish, where disagreeing risked being labeled ungrateful, where showing anger risked losing love. But here's the part no one told you. You can outgrow the emotional blueprint you were given. Just because you inherited patterns doesn't mean you're bound to repeat them. Just because your mother struggled to model a certain kind of strength doesn't mean you cannot learn it yourself. And this is where your story begins to change. At some point, life presents you with two choices. Continue being shaped by the past, or slowly, gently reshape yourself in the present. The moment you even start noticing these patterns, the moment something in you whispers, wait, what if this isn't really who I am? That is the beginning of strength. The very fact that you're questioning your emotional inheritance means you've already taken a step your mother might never have been able to take. That isn't disrespect, that's evolution. But before you rebuild, you have to face something difficult, something many people avoid their whole lives. You have to see your mother, not just as mum, but as a person with fears, a person with doubts, a person raised in her own environment, with its own rules and wounds, a person who may never have been given the emotional tools she truly needed, a person who might have survived more than she ever admitted, a person who did what she knew, even if what she knew left you feeling unseen, unheard, or responsible for holding everything together. Understanding this does not excuse everything, but it explains a lot. And when you understand the origin of your patterns, you stop feeling defective and start feeling aware. Awareness is the first doorway to freedom. Awareness is how you begin to rewrite your story. Awareness is how you stop inheriting struggles that were never meant to be yours. And once you begin that process, something subtle starts to shift. A quiet strength begins to form. Not the strength of pretending you're fine, not the strength of always being the caretaker, not the strength of swallowing your feelings until they harden inside you, but a new kind of strength. A strength rooted in self-understanding, a strength anchored in truth, a strength that grows not from being invulnerable, but from finally understanding what made you feel so vulnerable in the first place. Because once you begin to see your mother as human, something in you often softens. Not in a way that erases what hurt you, but in a way that frees you from having to keep proving that you were hurt. You realize the version of her you grew up with was not the whole story. It was the version shaped by her upbringing, her culture, her fears, her unspoken grief, her own mother's patterns. Maybe she never learned how to rest without guilt. Maybe she never saw vulnerability modeled, so she wore strength like armor. Maybe she never heard, "I'm proud of you," so she didn't know how to say it without awkwardness or restraint. Maybe she believed being needed was the only way to feel worthy, so she clung and controlled. Maybe she thought, Ignoring emotions made them disappear. These pieces of her became pieces of you. But here is the turning point. Once you recognize where they began, you gain the power to decide whether they end with you. You start noticing moments when you act out of habit, not truth. You start catching yourself over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-caring your way into exhaustion. You begin to realize that your inner critic often sounds more like her fears than your reality. And that realization is the beginning of emotional adulthood, because growing up is not just about paying bills or moving out. Growing up is the slow, often uncomfortable process of separating who you are from who you were trained to be. It's looking at the emotional rules you inherited and asking, do these still serve me? It's realizing that real strength doesn't come from repeating old patterns. It comes from breaking them. And maybe that's where you've been stuck. Not because you lack ability, but because you've never been taught. You were allowed to question the invisible rules written inside you. Rules like, always be pleasant. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Don't ask for too much. Don't show anger. Don't be a burden. Fix everyone else. Hold everything together. Hide your pain. Don't disappoint. Don't slow down. Don't rest. Those rules helped you survive. They helped you feel safer, more accepted, less at risk. But they also cost you. They taught you how to endure, but not how to truly live. They taught you how to serve, but not how to receive. They taught you how to function, but not how to feel fully. They taught you how to adapt, but not how to become yourself. And this is the part that requires courage. Questioning these rules will feel like disloyalty at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because your nervous system still associates those rules with safety, with love, with staying good. They protected you once. But you are not that child anymore. The threats you were preparing for may not be here anymore, yet a part of you still lives as if they are. That's why you avoid difficult conversations. That's why you struggle to say what you really want. That's why you feel guilty for taking up space. That's why you feel responsible for everyone's emotions. That's why you shut down when you most need connection. That's why you chase approval instead of truth. That's why you exhaust yourself, trying to be the version of you that keeps everyone else comfortable. These aren't random habits. They are inherited protections. But there comes a moment, quiet, often unexpected, when you realize the life you're maintaining is not the life you deeply want. It's the life your conditioning built. And maintaining something that was never truly yours is the most exhausting thing in the world. So let me ask you gently, who would you be if you were not trying to live up to the emotional rules you absorbed from your mother? Not the ideal mother, not the mother you wish you had, but the mother she actually was. Who would you be if you weren't afraid of her disappointment? Who would you be if you weren't unconsciously trying to heal her wounds with your life? Who would you be if you stopped living in the shadow of her anxiety, her self-neglect, her silence, her criticism, her fear of being too much or not enough? Maybe your weakness is not lack of strength. Maybe it's lack of permission. Permission you have been waiting for your whole life without realizing you can give it to yourself. Because here is the truth. No one teaches us clearly enough. You can outgrow the environment that shaped you. You can evolve beyond the patterns you inherited. You can become someone your mother never had the chance to be. You can heal wounds she never knew how to name. You can break cycles she didn't know how to step out of. You can build an inner world she was never allowed to have. And none of that is betrayal. It is continuation. It is expansion. It is choosing growth where she only knew survival. You are not rejecting her. By becoming more whole, you are honoring the part of her that silently hoped you would have more freedom than she did. But this transformation won't come from one dramatic moment. It's not about a single breakthrough or big speech. Real change is quieter. It arrives in small choices, repeated over time. It happens in the moment. You pause before apologizing for something that doesn't need an apology. The moment you say no, even when your voice shakes. The moment you let yourself rest without earning it through exhaustion. The moment you tell the truth, instead of saying, "It's fine." The moment you ask for help and don't take it back with, "Never mind, I'll figure it out." The moment you stop managing everyone's feelings and start honoring your own. The moment you forgive yourself for patterns you learned instead of punishing yourself for not knowing better sooner. These tiny moments slowly build a new inner voice, one that no longer echoes only your mother's pain, but begins to sound like your own wisdom. Not the over-accommodating you, not the invisible you, not the endlessly responsible you, the real you, the one who has been waiting for years, under the weight of inherited expectations, the you who wants to feel without apologizing, the you who wants to rest without guilt, the you who wants to pursue something meaningful, not just something acceptable, the you who wants to stop pretending you're okay all the time, the you who wants to live with purpose, not just compliance. Maybe that version of you feels far away right now. Maybe you don't know how to reach them, but every transformation begins with a simple realization. You are not responsible for the emotional gaps your mother carried. You are only responsible for what you choose to carry forward. Her strengths shaped you. So did her fears. So did her insecurities. So did her unhealed parts. But now you have something she may never have had. Awareness. And awareness is the first doorway to change. Once you walk through it, something important becomes clear. You are not becoming weaker by confronting your past. You are becoming stronger by understanding it, because real strength is not the absence of emotion. Real strength is the willingness to see your patterns clearly without shaming yourself for them. Real strength is seeing your mother fully, her best and her worst, without letting either one dictate your future. Real strength is choosing growth, even when it feels unfamiliar and scary. That unfamiliar feeling, that is how you know you are becoming someone new. And maybe one day, when you look back, you will realize something powerful. The thing you once called weakness was actually the beginning of your transformation. It was the signal that something inside you needed more. More safety, more space, more honesty, more self-respect. And the journey you are on now is leading you somewhere important. To freedom. Freedom from the echo of a mother who could not always guide you in the ways you needed. Freedom to define love, strength, and worth on your own terms. You are allowed to build a new definition of strength, one grounded in awareness, compassion, courage, honesty, and self-respect. And you don't need anyone's permission to start. You can begin here, quietly, with a decision no one else has to see. Your story continues with you, not with the patterns you inherited, not with the weight you carried, not with the limits you were taught, but with the strength you are slowly discovering within yourself. And as that strength unfolds, you may come to see something almost gentle. You were never truly weak because of your mother. You only believed you were. What you called weakness was always the doorway to becoming stronger than the generation before you. And that strength, your strength, is only just beginning.